really excited to be here. It's interesting to be in this new format. So I'm having a little bit of fun with it, although I do miss being there in person and being able to present like a hands-on session. But I'm going to try to imitate that a little bit with some specimens that I collected. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about aquatic and riparian invasive species. And I'm doing a lead presentation, but I also want to acknowledge Linda Cerniak-Tucker and Sam Chan, who might already be out there participating, but they'll be joining later. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. I just wanted to start off by just doing a little presentation about some current events. Anybody, are you able to raise hands or something? Has anybody heard about the Asian giant hornet or the murder hornets that were recently discovered in Washington, or at least detected? They were recently detected only a couple of months ago, so this is a fairly recent event that you might be interested. It was all over the news. This gentleman noticed that his beehive, his honeybee hive, had been, all the bees were killed and they were decapitated and like ripped apart, and didn't know why. And then when he heard about somebody had seen a murder hornet, or it was like, oh, that must be why. And so these are introduced from Asia, I believe. I'm forgetting the actual country of origin, but they have had a number of detections, but we haven't actually established yet. But they do pose a threat to potentially our native butterflies and native bees, and they are this enormous hornet that's 1.5 to 2 inches long. They just devastate hives, and they could possibly also attack native bees. So they're definitely of concern, but so far they haven't been found in Oregon yet. And so it's an opportunity for us to prevent invasive species like this. So just a little bit of a current event to introduce the topic of invasive species to you all, where there are these organisms. And if you do see one, you can report it to the Oregon Department of Agriculture or call that number. You could probably Google that and get the information you want. But it is pretty shocking, this idea that there's this enormous murder hornet out there just killing off bees, and it's pretty accurate. Invasive species are a pretty huge threat to our native ecosystems, our agriculture, and our economy. This is hit the news, and everybody kind of learned about it, and they were like, oh my God, like COVID-19 and now murder hornets, what are we going to do? But actually, it's in a way, it's almost an opportunity for us, because it actually is not established yet, and it's an opportunity to prevent some of the invasions that I'm going to share later. So what is an invasive species? Katie, are people able to like unmute themselves and talk? Yeah,
if we want. I mean, we can definitely do that if you want. Can you don't have that bar, right? Because you're sharing.
No, I can see the bar on the bottom, but okay. I maybe not quite yet. But if anybody does want to raise a question and talk or ask any question at any time, you can. Maybe you can see a show of hands for how many people have heard of invasive species before. Raise your hand. And
you can see the raising of hands.
Yeah, I can see the hands raising.
All right, we got
So, yeah. Wow, look at all the people here. It's so great to be here in this forum with you. And since you can ask questions, if you do have a question, I will pause and ask if there's questions as we go. This question for you: what is invasive species? And I'm gonna go ahead and. Does anybody want to venture, like test out our system here and unmute themselves and reply? Okay. I don't know how long that process will take, and I know we have limited time, but anybody out there? Okay. How about we do it like this? If you want to ask a question or reply out loud, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you, something like that. Unmute your microphone. But invasive species are essentially plants, animals, insects that are not native to a certain area and were introduced by people and have a negative impact on the economy, our environment, and our agriculture. Basically, human health, most everything that we value as a society, invasive species have a negative impact on. So why is this a problem? I wanted to share this inspiring video where it can help us all understand how much we really do rely on our natural resources to sustain life on this planet. So I'm going to see if I can grab that link and put it in the YouTube, put it in the chat. It's not letting me grab it from my PowerPoint, so I'll just get it from the web again. And let you all take a look at this video, because I understand it doesn't work too well with Microsoft Teams to show video. Let's see. See, where is the chat? There it is. Oh, wow, look at all these great non-native, and Cecil Rich says that they're non-native and cause harm to the economy and native species. That's right. I just looked at the chat. Thank you for sharing that. They're big and slow to swat. The murder hornets. Yeah, that's funny. Oh, I love this conversation. Hey, there's Sam. It looks like Sam has just joined us.
Excellent.
I think you need to unmute yourself, Sam. And
do you want folks to go and watch that YouTube video now, Tanya?
Yeah, Sam, I was just sharing the link to the International Year of Plant Health video for everyone to just watch in the next 1 minute as part of the introduction. So I believe people are watching that now. Okay. I think that's it should be completed by now. And I hope that you all enjoyed the video. For me, it's a very inspirational, well-made video to emphasize the importance of plant health for sustaining life on our planet, and invasive species are a major threat to plant health. And Sam has joined us now. So Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, how are you? Good to be back with my Forest Service colleagues again. Sam Chan here, professor at Oregon State University with a specialty in aquatic invasive species and in riparian and watershed health. Thanks for letting me join you guys.
Thanks for joining us, Sam. And And Sam and I will be co-presenting. I'll be mostly talking, but I'm definitely looking forward to Sam chiming in as part of our presentation. So moving on, I'm going to start out with a broad overview of invasive species impacts in general before we dive into some of the specific ones. And Sam, you really need to tune into the chat here. That's very interactive. I love seeing all these great posts for people commenting and sharing questions as well. So what do invasive species do? It's actually quite a bit of impacts, decrease in biodiversity. They can pollute and destroy water habitats, damages and then destroys our infrastructure and property. And this picture is a branch of Japanese knotweed actually growing through a wall. Degrade our farmland, our ranch land, and our pristine areas of recreation. Basically, we lose land, we lose access to valuable land because invasive species make it impossible to use it. Many of them spread disease or are poisonous themselves. And they cost a lot of money impacting our economy when we try to directly by destroying our crops, but also the effort to remove them. And many of them also can increase wildfires. So invasive species are a serious problem that we would like to prevent as much as possible. This is an example of giant hogweed, which is actually one of the species on our list today to learn. This plant grows extremely tall and looks a lot like cow parsnip, but this is like 10 to 15 feet tall, like way over your head. But unfortunately, the sap has toxic in the sap. And unfortunately, if you touch it, it can cause severe blisters when exposed to sun. It's called a phytophototoxin. And the sad part is that the stems are hollow, so children will find these hollow stems and use them as like binoculars or pea shooters or something, and then just get the rashes all over their bodies. And so an example of the threat to human health. So we've learned actually that alien species are actually number 2 to habitat loss in terms of threat to our native biodiversity. So we do a lot of work to prevent, to preserve land, but invasive species do not recognize boundaries. So you can't tell invasive species, oh, don't go there. That's a preserve. That's intended to not be developed. It's a natural area. Well, they're like, whatever. We're going to go invade anyway. So even if you preserve land, invasive species will just go in and have a negative impact. That's why organizations like the Nature Conservancy are extremely concerned about invasive species, because even though they've preserved it, they can't protect it from invasive species. This is a fun example that pretty recent in the news. Any ideas? It's called Paradise Regained: How the Palmyra Atoll Got Rid of Invasive Mosquitoes. So any thoughts about how could you get rid of invasive mosquitoes? I know I have some pictures in there that are a clue. But the Palmyra Atoll is actually way out in the Pacific Ocean, south of Hawaii, just really, really isolated. No native mammals or no native mosquitoes either. And also, of course, no native rats. The military actually used it as a base in World War II, which introduced the rats population. And when the atoll was actually acquired by, I believe it was the Fish and Wildlife Service, now it's a nature reserve, and it's protected. So the scientists went there to study and help protect this beautiful atoll, and found overrun with rats. And of course, because of rats' negative impact on the bird population, that was the #1 priority, to eradicate rats from this atoll. So they poisoned the rats and successfully eradicated them, but noticed, now there's no mosquitoes anymore. And we're like puzzled, why is it that it used to be that mosquitoes were buzzing around us constantly and annoying us and biting us, and now hardly notice them at all? and they realized that actually by removing the rats, they removed a food source for the mosquitoes, because the mosquitoes were actually biting the rats. And also the rats would eat the coconuts in half and leave half open coconut shells, which provided rat breeding ground. So it's a kind of a positive story, a success story in helping to preserve this beautiful place and also get rid of mosquitoes. But it also is a strong message about how interconnected our species are. And what if we're losing a native species? What is the other native interconnected species that would be losing along with it? In this case, we lost an invasive species and happily lost another invasive, but there's many cases where we have species that are interconnected, and if you lose one, you lose the other. And invasive species threaten our native species. So anyways, an interesting story. So how did invasive species get here?
Yeah, can I add something to that situation? Yeah. So on that atoll was one of the better examples of really a success story when a federal agency, in this case Fish and Wildlife, launched this program. Typically, when a program goes to eradicate an animal, there's lots of concerns because you're essentially producing a bait, which is a mammal bait, specific more to rats, but yet other similar organisms could actually consume them. But because this is an atoll and it's not populated now, it's one of those areas where Fish and Wildlife was able to implement the strategy rather easily. But imagine you were to do this on a more populated area, be much more difficult for you as land managers. The other aspect to that is that by having the rats removed, the bird population suddenly increased, as well as some of the native insects, as well as the amphibians, believe it or not. And so because of that, the mosquitoes were practically eradicated, which is rather unusual because normally it's almost impossible for a biological control to eradicate an organism, but in this case it did. So that just shows how the value of biodiversity keeps things in check. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, it's a very interesting case study. How did they get here? Well, Gary Larson would have you believe that poodles got to North America in banana shipments. This image that I found is a little blurry, so I circled the poodles for you. But essentially, invasive species get here by hitchhiking on humans and all of our activities as we traverse the globe, engage in e-commerce or commerce, even our natural resources activities, such as all of you traveling to remote streams and walking through these areas, could be vectors for the spread of invasive species, as well as schools and classrooms that might have an animal in their classroom and then release it after they're done. There's a lot of ways that the species are spread around through human behavior. One example I wanted to share was this example of the zebra and quagga mussels. Raise your hand if you've heard of zebra and quagga mussels before. I'll just take a look at the hands. Oh yeah, 6, 7, 10, 12, 11. So yeah, a lot of you have heard of this. 17, 19 folks there. Yeah, the zebra and quagga mussels were introduced to the Great Lakes in 1988, I believe, and since then have spread through the Great Lakes and through the river systems connecting to the Great Lakes. Quite quickly, they colonize any surface under the water, clogging intake pipes, destroying our infrastructure, and also damaging and destroying our native ecosystems. This is sort of an animated map showing the spread of invasive species, the spread of quagga mussels since they were introduced. It's a little shocking, but you'll notice that they mostly were contained to the East Coast and Mississippi Basin, because they generally are spread downstream, and so would need a little help to get over the Rocky Mountains. And there was an initiative called the 100th Meridian Initiative to prevent them from passing. But there in 2017, they were able to get over to the West Coast and probably were brought over in a houseboat that was infested. Since then, there's been a lot of work preventing the additional spread on the West Coast, but it's still something we all need to be extremely aware of. Thankfully, so far, there's still no quagga and zebra mussels in Oregon. I brought up a more current map. These are just quagga mussels, but you can see that there are some infestations here in Nevada and Utah and South Dakota. And so it is, they are getting closer and something that we need to be aware of. They're probably the #1 invasive species threat to the Columbia River Basin, especially thinking about our hydro dams and fishing. They use the water intake to cool these supercomputers for us to access the internet. So quagga mussels could shut down the speed of your internet. Now that would be a disaster. So what do you do about them? This cartoon is a little silly. Like we never should have waited this long. Now the weeds have completely taken over. And it's true, like if any of you have a garden and you see a weed there, you know that if you get it out right away, you're going to prevent a headache in the future. This map of an invasion curve is a textbook curve. Like if you study invasive species, this is a curve that you'll become familiar with because they generally, invasive species, start at really low levels for a long time, and then something happens and they just explode in population. But the main message behind this curve showing the increase in invasive species infestation in time, that it parallels the cost of control. So clearly, the more you have, the more difficult it is to remove and the more damage it is. Unfortunately, we usually don't pay attention until we're already up here in the red. Oh, wow, look at all these blackberries. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with blackberries. That here in Oregon, they're just everywhere. And gosh, can you imagine getting rid of them all? But if we had found them and prevented them before they became that abundant, I think Oregon would be a much different place. And then this also illustrates the importance of education and learning what your species are before they get here. And so that's what we're doing now, learning about what species you can be looking out for so that we can prevent them from getting up here in the red end of the curve. But what happened? What are some of these costs? The human health costs. One example is the E. coli was spread by feral pigs into spinach and caused death and also sickness to livestock, pets, and people. There's economic costs. Here, this is an example of Asian carp in the Great Lakes. Could cost $137 billion spent every year in the Great Lakes fisheries. There's 78.5 million investment to prevent their spread. So definitely a huge economic cost. This is an example of here in Oregon, we're concerned about this fish. This warm water invader, the northern pike, is just recently been detected and is something that is a huge concern to all of the effort we work on to protect our native salmon and steelhead fisheries could all be decimated by this aggressive fish. And one example of the environmental and ecological costs is the bullfrog. How many of you guys have heard of the American bullfrog? If you hike around or go to any ponds, at least here in the Eugene area, I was just out Mount Pisgah this morning collecting specimens for this workshop, and bullfrogs just hopping around everywhere. They're very abundant, but they are of huge ecological impact by just eating everything that they come across. So even they eat themselves, and they definitely eat our native frogs. So what do we do? This is a kind of a funny front page of the Eugene Weekly showing this crazy compilation of different invasive species: earthworms, Asian carp, mute swan, Chinese mitten crab, all combined into one. But the point that I would like to make is that it does seem like the invasive species are everywhere, but we really shouldn't lose hope. There's so much beauty out there still that we can protect here in Oregon and then all over the United States. I believe this might be Waldo Lake. I'm not sure exactly where all these places are, but they're all here in Oregon, and these fantastic landscapes that we all can still protect by basically learning what species to be looking out for and preventing their spread and reporting them if we find them. And here are some ways to raise awareness with others about the problem of invasive species. There's many campaigns out there to focus on different pathways of spread. Clean, Drain, Dry is the boating and fishing pathway. To make sure to clean and drain, dry your gear before you move to another watershed. And I'm sure that is an integral part of your protocol this summer. But if you're an international traveler, you can remember, don't pack a pest in your luggage. If you have pets, go back up. If you have pets, don't let them loose. Don't release your aquatic pets in the environment. If you like to camp, buy your firewood where you burn it, plant native plants, and report pigs. There's all sorts of ways that we can raise awareness and prevent the spread of these species. And I just saw Linda join us. Hi, Linda. I'm glad that you're here. Linda will be presenting soon about invasive earthworms. All right, so are there any questions or comments so far? I can see before I move into the species. I see Sam posted a comment about the Meridian barrier was breached to infested boats, yet the Pacific Northwest is the only region free of quagga mussels. Your monitoring work is the most effective. Thanks, Sam. It said northern pike is native, but reservoirs created by dams and loss of refugia for prey have made these aggressive predators an invasive species. Thanks. Yeah, that's a good point, Sam, that sometimes the species that we're looking at are actually native to the region, but because of the way we've changed our environment, we've given them an advantage. They're able to thrive and outcompete some native species that are more susceptible to those changes. So humans damaging these ecosystems can give invasive species an advantage.
Hey, Tania, I'd like to ask the participants if any of you have actually been down to the Klamath Falls area and Diamond Lake. Main reason is that that's an area where ODF&W and Forest Service have invested, I think, over the years, about $8 million in trying to eradicate the tui chub, which is a native species, but it's only native in the next drainage over, not in that drainage. And so because of that, it's created, that fish in itself has created toxic algae blooms in Diamond Lake. So there's another example of how sometimes an introduction goes, or even though it's a native fish, but not native to that particular drainage.
Thank you. Yeah, and I have another example of that, Sam, is my master's degree was studying what was supposed to be an invasive plant on the Galapagos Islands, an invasive grass that everybody was calling kikuyu grass. And then a taxonomic expert showed up and said, oh no, this is actually native. It's Paspalum vaginatum. And it's actually native to the entire tropical belt of the world. However, it was rapidly growing and overtaking lagoons. And so even though it was native, because the Galapagos National Park had actually built a road and blocked the interchange of water from the ocean to the lagoon, it allowed for conditions where the grass was actually able to thrive because it didn't have that regular flushing out of saline water. So it's still a problem, even though native. Okay, well, I'm going to jump in to start learning some of these species before our first break. Usually what we do is we give everybody a scavenger hunt handout, and everyone goes to set a table of specimens where you can try to match our clues on our scavenger hunt with the specimen on the table. So you have to read about them and try to guess which specimen goes with which clue. But because of this online setting, can't do that, but I'm going to try a different approach. I know a lot of you have heard of invasive species before, so what I'm going to do is give you the clue, and then if anybody wants to raise their hand and say what they think it is, or type it in the chat, let you think about it for a second, and then I'll tell you, and we'll just go through it that way. So our first one, with 3 to 5 whorls, brown and small, I pass through a fish gut and don't die at all. Does anybody know what that is? You can type it into the chat. Huh. Oh, I gotta scroll down. Looks like I might have stumped some people. Oh, you're right, Katie. It's the New Zealand mud snail. The New Zealand mud snail is a tiny little brown snail that originated from New Zealand and was brought here by some fly fishermen or women, fly fisher people, anglers, I should say, who traveled very quickly from New Zealand to Yellowstone Park, where the New Zealand mud snail is able to survive on their wet waders and gear. They're extremely small and extremely abundant, and can basically overtake an area of rocks, thousands and thousands of them in very high density. They clone themselves so they can rapidly reproduce. They're very small, so you don't see them transporting on your gear. And they have an operculum, which is like a little trap door that allows them to survive in harsh conditions. And these are something we are in Oregon, but not everywhere. So we're hopeful to be aware and detect new infestations. This is one reason why we put it first. We really want you to be looking out for the New Zealand mud snail. And yes, there's lots of native snails out there. So here's some pictures of some native snails to compare. But this middle picture here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the New Zealand mud snail is much more of a conical, uniform shape, and very, very small. You won't see any, when you see the New Zealand mud snail infestation, it'll be all tiny snails. The native snails might be a mix of larger, older specimens and younger ones, so you'll have different sizes. There's a native Fluminicola, the pebble snails. Their shells are more solid, and the bottom whorl is just a little larger in proportion. And also there's an.
Tania,
oh, Sam, go ahead.
Go back 3 slides to show the mud snails on the rock.
There you go.
Yeah, that one. Hey, hey folks, if you take a look at that photo, what's that the snails are feeding on? Anyone want to make a guess? There's a reason why you wear waders with special rubber and sometimes felt. Yeah, periphyton, that's right. And so because periphyton is that mixture of diatoms and algae, but mostly diatoms, that's basically the base of the food chain. That's what most of the aquatic invertebrates that are trout and anadromous fish feed on. And so if these snails are actually feeding on that periphyton, we basically take out the bottom of the food chain for our salmonids and trout. And so that's one of the reasons why they're such a big threat to our ecosystems here. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. And I don't know if you can see my video. I can see myself. I believe I've got my video on. I don't see myself on the big screen. There's somebody else there. I see myself a little one. But anyways, if you can see me, I actually have some live New Zealand mud snails here with me today, and I was going to just try to show them to my camera. If you can see just how tiny that is on my finger. Is it blurry? Can you see it? They don't get any bigger than that. And they're just these little brown, kind of nondescript, little perfect cone snails. And I wish I could show you in person so you could see them swimming around. Some other aquatic snails that are invasive to look out for. I don't have quiz questions for this. Yeah. Yeah, I do have a permit. I got a special permit to be able to have them. And then Zachary Morris asked, so can they really take over the biomass? And in some cases in Yellowstone National Park, they have seen them take over the biomass of some streams. Here in Oregon, I don't think they've been detected to be so abundant, but in a study that compared a stream, the diet, this compared the fish health, the health of fish fed on New Zealand mud snail versus the health of fish spread on, they're able to feed on their natural food sources. The fish that ate the New Zealand mud snail were much less healthy and less fecund. You can also keep an eye out for Chinese mystery snails. They're very large and very tough snails. They're invasive species. Asian clam are fairly abundant in Oregon. They're small, 15 millimeter long size shells that you'll find just embedded in with the gravel. They don't attach to surfaces. And there's also the big ear radix, which is distinguished by this large aperture, which is a new invader in Oregon as well to keep an eye out for. All right, so the next, let's do one more. I am an aquatic bivalve that colonizes substrates. Each one of us is only the size of a fingernail. My shells have a striped pattern, somewhat D-shaped. I have both a planktonic and adult shelled form. What am I? Anybody want to type in what they guess? That's right. Thanks, Zachary. It's a zebra mussels, zebra and quagga mussels. And I reviewed them already in the introductory portion, but I wanted to emphasize a little bit about their identification. I don't have a great picture for identification here, but you won't see any other freshwater mussels that are attaching to rocks or substrates or boats. So that's a really big indicator, is that if it's strongly attached to any substrate, you will, that's most likely zebra and quagga mussels. They're very small, the size of your fingernail, and have the striped shape pattern. We don't have them in Oregon yet, thankfully, so I'm hopeful you won't see them. Personally, whenever I see a boat go by me on the road, I'm always checking out the motor and looking at boats to see if they look clean and if they have quagga and zebra mussels on them, because that might be where you're more likely to see them. But this is definitely an important one to report if you find something that you suspect could be zebra or quagga mussels. All three of us have bumpy chela, or claws, narrow body plates on our backs, and narrow body plates on our backs. These features distinguish the three of us from our native look-alike. What are we? Anybody? Rusty, ring, and red crayfish. That's right. I'm sorry I don't pronounce Zia. Sorry I didn't butchered your name.
Homon.
Yeah, crayfish.
Homon.
Homon. Okay, that's right, Homon. Yep, crayfish. You guys got it. So while you're out there, you will probably come across crayfish, and the native crayfish is pretty abundant still in Oregon. I see it quite often, but we do have 3 invasive crayfish to keep an eye out for. They're aggressive competitors with our native species, and also eat tons of vegetation and native invertebrates and fish. So this is a picture of our native signal crayfish, and you can tell it's our native one because it has this, oftentimes has this white patch on its chela. And you'll see in another picture, if you look at the back of the crayfish, you can see there's 2 body plates, and in the native one, there's a nice big gap between the 2 plates, and in the invasive ones, they're much closer together. So this is called the signal crayfish because those white dots were thought to be like, they looked like they were signaling, like flag signals between boaters from a distance. Here's our rusty crayfish with the red rusty spot on its side. It's found mostly in Oregon in the John Day River. I was just at the John Day River and I didn't see any there, but it was pretty high water level, so that's probably why. And you can see here on its back, these two body plates are close together. And also the chela are much more bumpy. Similarly, our ringed crayfish, body plates close together, these two distinguishing rings, and kind of orange and black dots on its tips of its chela. I just received an Oregon Invasive Species hotline report of ringed crayfish where it was found in the Coast Fork of the Willamette, and it's also been found in Dorina and Row River, so it is in the Willamette River watershed, and that's sort of a recent jump. It used to only be found in the Umpqua, so it is spreading. The red swamp crayfish is more abundant in Oregon. It does really well with slow-moving, warm waters, low oxygen, and living in the sediment, very distinguished by its really bright red chela. Usually I have a live one to show everyone, but not this time. Next year, I hope. I wanted to share this story, actually. It relates to Sam's story about the Tui chub, where here in Oregon has, I'm sure you're all familiar with Crater Lake. It's basically a national treasure. This beautiful Mount Mazama exploded and created a lake inside a mountain, and it's isolated from other habitats and holds very unique biospecies composition. And the rough-skinned newt got in there and evolved into its own species, Mazama newts. But the crayfish didn't. So they evolved as a species without the presence of crayfish. However, because of human angling and transport and using crayfish as bait, our native signal crayfish was introduced into Crater Lake and has been outcompeting this endemic newt that only exists in Crater Lake. And what's interesting is that the newt usually is has this toxic underbelly that it defends itself against predators, but because it had been without predators for so long, it actually lost the toxicity in its skin. And this is it lost its ability to produce this neurotoxin, which is actually also used by pufferfish and octopus. So it's another story of a native species that can become invasive. In fact, the signal crayfish is considered invasive in California and in Europe, but here it's Oregon. It's native. Okay. I have some questions here. Zebra mussels attach only to the motor or also in the bottom of the boat? Definitely, it attaches everywhere, to the bottom of the boat, to crevices, not just to motors. Sam mentioned that quagga mussels tend to be found in waters with higher calcium. Thanks for adding that. Our next quiz question is, I can be distinguished from beavers by my white whiskers and my rat-like tail. I burrow in riverbanks, devour vegetation, and cause erosion. Who knows what that is? All right, Erin, you're right. Laura, yep. Kim, Sophia, Ken, Nutria. So if that's correct, we have a lot of Nutria living in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. In fact, I just received another hotline report, because I respond to hotline reports in Lane County. And someone had reported a Nutria just walking down the street, like probably miles away from a river or a water body. And apparently that's normal for them to get out there and start exploring and looking for new habitat and mates when they get to a certain age. But you can, so watch out for Nutria. Hopefully they won't be in some of the higher order streams that you're going to be visiting. They have these long rat-like tails, white whiskers, and red teeth. They can transmit diseases, and they destroy riverbanks by burrowing into our riverbanks and causing erosion, and they're just a nightmare for restoration efforts by killing off all the newly planted plants. Any questions? Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure if they wipe out cattails. I imagine they would. The interesting thing about Nutria is that they're another example of how a species has benefited from humans' transformation of our landscape, because our rivers naturally used to flood, and there really wasn't much of a bank. They would like jump the banks and flood out, and there's large floodplains, and the rivers would change into different river channels and shifting all the time depending on floods and the natural topography of the land. But with human presence and our need to control that river so it doesn't wash our homes away, we've channelized a lot of our rivers and created fairly steep river banks where Nutria do quite well. So I think in the case of cattails, we might not find them overlapping with the Nutria habitat because they might not exist in those steep river banks, but I could be wrong. Yeah, Nutria are native to Patagonia, South America.
Nutria. So someone asked if they're native to America, to North America. No, they're not. And the reason why they were brought in was because we depleted our beaver supply for pelts as fur traders came and settled the West, and also as we homesteaded areas. And so it was thought that we needed another supply of fur, and so the Nutria was brought in to be farmed, and because of it, it actually escaped. And here we have Nutria, and we see them in Louisiana is one area where they are, and then here in Oregon, and just the past few years in Northern California, and in California, really concerned because water is so important for agriculture, and they have a lot of irrigation canals that these Nutria are actually punching holes in their irrigation canals, and therefore the water that should be shipped to the farmers are leaking out of the system.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story about the Nutria actually trading places with the beavers, because beavers were introduced to South America, and now they're considered invasive species where Nutria are native.
Yeah, and this that's why they're considered invasive in South America, is because trees grow a lot slower in that part of South America because it's almost near the Antarctic. I mean, it's pretty close. And so oak growth trees there are like about 12 to maybe 16 inches in diameter, whereas our oak growth 400 years old, which are probably, 3 to 4 to 5, 6, 7 feet in diameter. And so the other thing about the Nutria, about the beavers, is that in South America, woody debris is not a good thing because it builds up the water table, and it actually flooded these old growth trees. And so different systems have different ecological functions, and so that's a difference in our world.
It's really fascinating. And you'll see these Nutria are happily munching away on carrots, which this is a zoom in of a photo of Nutria that were being fed by people. And yeah, definitely don't encourage you to feed them.
Tanya, Laura Koger recommended that we see a video called Rodents of Unusual Size. We should show that in our training next time. Okay.
Yeah, I will copy that and make a note of that. I'd like to check that out. Thank you, Laura. We could add it to the YouTube page for the training. Okay, so yeah. I'm just going to put it in my notes. Okay, back to the presentation. Okay, next quiz question.
Oh, there's one more question. Do Nutria ever interact? They interact negatively because Nutria don't build dams, but beavers do. So, and because of that, they actually prefer slightly different habitats.
I can be distinguished from native amphibians by my large tympanum, or eardrum, located right behind the eye, and large gape. I will eat whatever will fit in my mouth, including baby western pond turtles. All right, so good job, Sophia and Laura. Bullfrog, that's correct. We talked a little bit about that in the intro. you will see bullfrogs. Certainly are likely to see them this summer. They're more common in lower in the valley, in slower moving water, warmer water. But they really do have a pretty dramatic impact on our ecosystems by essentially consuming everything else that is smaller than their own heads, and they even eat themselves. There's one interesting ecological study that looked at the relationship between the warm water invasive fishes, bullfrogs, and dragonfly larvae, and they found that when bullfrogs were present, it was more likely to see the invasive fishes as well, mainly because the bullfrogs would eat the dragonfly larvae, which normally would have preyed on the invasive fish eggs. So it's sort of an interesting food web dynamic where introduction of one invasive species actually promotes another invasive species indirectly through the food chain. But got to look at. Go ahead, Sam.
Bullfrogs. So we actually have a very large frog here in the western U.S. It's the red-legged frog. From California all the way up to Alaska, it's the red-legged frog. But due to habitat destruction and also consumption, red-legged frogs became depleted in many areas. So that's why the American bullfrog, which is actually from the Midwest, was actually introduced. So that's one thing. The other aspect is that you see that, Tanya, it's a photo with the arrow there. That's this tympanum. That's essentially its ear. And so if you look at the gape, which is essentially opening the mouth, its mouth actually goes all the way back to the ear. So if you can imagine your mouth, if thankfully not, extended all the way back to the ear, you can imagine how big that mouth can open and consume predators. So the other aspect, maybe Tanya will talk about it, but is that the bullfrog is actually a carrier of the Chytrid fungus disease, which is a real problem for our native amphibians. I think many of you know Dr. Dee Olson. You know, she spends at the PNW station. She spends quite a bit of time, had studied this at high elevations, but it's a carrier. But yet it doesn't show symptoms of chytrids, so that's not a good thing. Yes, you can eat them too. Yes, right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Darlene asks, or somebody, let's see. Oh yeah, Darlene asked if it would be okay to eat, and yes, you can capture them and eat them if you like, but it wouldn't probably, unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to eat them fast enough to get rid of them. But I have seen them in restaurants here in Oregon. Let's see, what's the next quiz question? I'm an evergreen woolly vine with alternative waxy leaves that can trail along the ground or grow vertically up trees, fences, walls, and hillsides. Although I am widespread in urban areas, it is still important to watch out for me and keep me out of more remote natural areas. What am I? This one might be a little bit more tricky, or not. Any guesses? That's right, Catherine. English ivy. Laura, good. Richard and Eric, you got it. English ivy. Possibly many of you are from the West Coast and are extremely familiar with ivy. Actually, it's all nationwide. But thankfully, it's not that abundant in some of the higher elevation and more protected areas of our forests. So we still, even though we don't really want to hear about it if you see it in, the city, but if you come across it during your work in the rivers and streams, and we would like you to report that for us. And I actually did bring a little specimen I could show you through the webcam. I'll be right back. So if you can see, I just ripped this up this morning. The roots, anytime the vine hits the ground, it puts the roots down, these waxy leaves, and it does, it can kill trees. It strangles trees. Here's a picture a couple pictures that I've taken over the years. The left one is on the way out to Florence on the Siuslaw estuary, where it's basically taken over. I think that's a poplar. And then the right-hand side is actually an apple tree. And I never figured out that it was actually just completely infested with ivy until years after driving by this funny-looking mushroom tree when I realized it was actually an apple tree that was completely infested. And if you look closely, you can see that the ivy that's higher up in the tree has berries on it, and it doesn't usually produce berries until it does grow higher up in the canopy of the tree. So one way to help prevent its spread is just don't let it get up and grow up into the trees by just cutting around, girdling the tree essentially. Not the tree, but cutting the ivy off of the base of the tree. Okay, I'm going to go into the next section of aquatic weeds, but it is 1:30, and this is the time when I asked Linda to join us and share about her research on the crazy jumping worm. And so I think we're going to shift gears a little bit, and Linda has a presentation for us. We're going to talk about the crazy jumping worm. So Linda, are you there?
I am here, but I don't actually have permission to upload my PowerPoint.
I think what Katie was able to do with me is to allow you to share your screen.
Okay.
And so, could you help her out, Katie? I'm sure she's on it.
I'm talking the whole time and I'm muted, so it's like.
Yeah.
See, Linda.
Feel free to share your video if you like, Linda.
What's your last name, Linda?
Tucker Cerniak.
Oh, here you are.
Yeah, so I just want to introduce Linda. Linda is one of my PhD students, and she actually took on this project because she wanted to study both biology and ecology and impacts and management of invasive species, while also focusing on outreach and education, which is really what we do. It's our combination of both. So Linda's working on a project that really looks at this new worm that was recently introduced, and now let her take over and why it's important to our forests and why it's important to you.
Okay, so can everyone see my presentation? I'm not I can't see it.
I can't see it yet.
Yeah, not yet.
We can just see you.
You can see me. Okay, let's see. Because I clicked share screen. Maybe I need to do it again. Oh, okay. There.
Yay.
Okay, cool. Okay, perfect. All right. So as Sam mentioned, I'm a graduate student here at OSU studying jumping worms. So first, I just wanted to say that a lot of people think about earthworms and they think of them as being, really awesome for your soil, help the plants in your gardens grow. People buy earthworm casts and, or earthworm tea and put them in their gardens. But people are usually really surprised to find out that most of the earthworms, in their garden or that they see on the sidewalk after the rain are actually not native to North America. Most of them are actually European species that were brought over by colonizers and have just rapidly spread all over through North America. And there's actually a lot of places in North America where there are no native earthworms. Basically anywhere that was glaciated in the last glaciation isn't going to have a native earthworm, which has a lot of consequences for the forest when you introduce that earthworm into that habitat, because those habitats have evolved without earthworms. And this picture shows, I believe this is Michigan in the Midwest, places without earthworms. There's a lot of understory plants, but where the earthworms are, those plants have kind of disappeared because the earthworms are eating that leaf litter, they're changing the nutrient cycling, and plants just aren't able to get the nutrients they need and, don't grow. There's other consequences too, like native salamanders and ground nesting birds are negatively impacted. Asian jumping worms in particular can bioaccumulate different types of heavy metals. There's also the chance that they could kind of mobilize different toxins like mercury, which could eventually get into the waterways. So there's a lot of concerns with earthworms, even if there are native earthworms, like in the Pacific Northwest, we do have some. When you're introducing a new species, there are a lot of consequences, and we really don't know a lot about jumping worms because they are pretty new to the scene compared to the European species. So the first thing that's like the thing that lets you identify them the easiest is this crazy thrashing motion that they have. This is really unique to jumping worms. There's a few different species, but they all look very similar and they all behave this way. So red wigglers wiggle a little bit like this, but not nearly as crazy as this. So if you see a worm just thrashing about like crazy, you've got a jumping worm in the Amynthus genus. If you want to look up close, the actual worm, the best way to identify it is the clitellum, which is its reproductive structure. And it's basically a little band that goes around the earthworm. And on the jumping worm, it's kind of cream to white in color. It's very smooth. It wraps all the way around the earthworm, and it's really distinctive compared to the rest of the earthworm. Like the rest of the earthworm is very dark. Now, if you compare that to a nightcrawler, nightcrawlers, their clitellum is kind of similar in color to the rest of their body. It's kind of bumpy, it's raised up. It doesn't actually wrap all the way around the earthworm. So this really makes it easy to see them, especially if you're looking at all those earthworms on the sidewalk. I actually found one at Oregon State's campus just looking at the worms and spotted one on the sidewalk, and I just honed right in on that clitella because it's so obvious compared to other earthworms. But this is only something you'll find on a reproductively mature earthworm. So if you've got a younger earthworm, you really have to, base your ID based on that thrashing motion in the video. So just a tiny bit about their biology. They're an annual species. So they live roughly a year, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, depending on the climate. They're epiendogic, which basically means that they feed at the surface, but they can also go underneath in the soil and eat soil as well. They can also live at super high densities. Like European species like nightcrawlers, maybe you'll see maybe at most, between 10 and 20 in like a square meter of space. Even that's a little bit high. The highest that they found these jumping worms is actually 200 individuals in a square meter plot of soil, which is ridiculously high. And they can also reproduce asexually. So you really only need one worm to get a whole bunch of more worms. So these worms actually come from Japan and the Korean Peninsula. The climate there ranges from subarctic to subtropical and everything in between. They can be found in a wide variety of habitats, deciduous and coniferous forests, grasslands, agricultural fields, urban gardens, arboretums. Basically, if there's soil and it's warm enough for them, they're going to live there. And this is really concerning because with the European species, a lot of them actually don't seem to be problematic in coniferous forests. There's not a lot of research in those kind of ecosystems, but those kind of forests tend to be a little bit more acidic, which is kind of, they can't tolerate the acid as well, but these earthworms actually, live in those kind of environments. So it's really concerning that we might actually eventually see them getting into forests like the Coast Range, where we don't really see problems with the European species. This is where they are here in the US. Looking at this map, if a state is highlighted, doesn't mean they're like all over the state. It just means they're somewhere in the state. So they're fairly widespread on the eastern half of the country, but they actually were found in Oregon first. That was the first finding west of the Rockies in 2016. And now they've kind of spread throughout the I-5 corridor here in the Northwest, from Grants Pass all the way up to British Columbia. And I think this is fabulous that they all appear on the I-5 corridor, which, people live there, so that's where people are probably going to be reporting the most. But something else to consider about this is people have to know what this earthworm looks like, or be curious about why they have this weird earthworm to make that report. A lot of people just think this is some other earthworm. Maybe it's a nightcrawler that's just hyperactive on coffee or something like that. That's what I heard someone say. They just thought it was a hyper nightcrawler because they didn't really know any better. So these worms could be a lot more widespread than we thought, which is why it's really important to report these. And in terms of how they're spread, there's a couple different ways of doing that. Fishing bait, horticulture, composting, and walking and hiking. These make great fishing worms. That's what they're advertised for. I think it's obvious based on their movement. You can buy these online quite easily. You can buy them by the thousands and sell them in your bait shop if you wanted to. It's really easy for them to be in soil and be transported in flower pots or just in bulk soil. This photo is one of those kind of little biodegradable pots that you might buy like a pepper plant or something in from the store. And there's that worm kind of sliding up into the drainage hole. So it's super easy for them to be transported with soil and potted plants. And that's probably one of the ways they have been transported around Oregon. They aren't strictly a composting worm exactly like a red wiggler. but they can live in your compost pile, and a lot of people buy them for that. So they're not necessarily going to eat, all those tasty vegetables, but they will like your grass clippings or your leaves that you rake up in the fall, or bits of wood that you might throw in there. And last, they produce something called a cocoon. It's not like a butterfly cocoon, it's more like an egg that has little embryos inside. And it has maybe 2 to 3 embryos, and these are super hardy. They can withstand extremely cold temperatures. They can withstand reasonable heat as well. So this is really the big problem. You can transport them in your shoe quite easily. If you stepped on one somewhere, you could easily transport it to your local park or into your local forest or wherever. And while adults are reasonably susceptible to changes in temperature, these are so hardy and so easy to spread. This is maybe the more difficult part to deal with when it comes to spreading these worms. So that's all I have for you because I wanted to keep it kind of short. But here's my contact info. If you just Google my name, you can find me. It's quite unique. If you have any questions about them, please do ask me.
Thank you so much, Linda. There is a question on the chat from Elizabeth Phipps who asks, if found, who would we contact to report it?
Oh, so there's the Oregon Invasives hotline, which I forget off the top of my head what the phone number is, but you can actually, they have a website where you can report that.
I'll type that into the chat for you.
Yeah, so that's probably an easy way. I'm not sure how other people have. Some people got in touch with the Department of Agriculture and told them. I don't really know how they got in touch with them, but the hotline is probably the easiest way to do it. And you can tell me because I want to know.
I think the number is 1-866-INVADER.
Oh, it says, is there a contact for Washington? I assume Washington has a similar hotline. Do you know, Tania?
I don't know what the number is, but I would imagine a quick Google search would result. I do believe they have an invasive reporting mechanism. And you can even report stuff from Washington on the Oregon Invasives hotline. Like you can pick anywhere on the map and report it. Doesn't have to be in Oregon.
Tania and Katie, I'm sure that we have a protocol for level 2 in terms of people finding specimens of any of the species we report and then sending to us for review and then reporting.
That's true. And so, Elizabeth, you can always contact me or Jim Capurso. We're the kind of contacts. First, if you have your invasive person on your force, if you know who that is, you can contact them. But we want to get it at the regional level, and then we can report it up from there too. So you can always send any of that stuff to me, and then I'll send it down to those guys, to Tania and Sam, and have them take a look at it. We've sent pictures to them before, so.
That's what we're here for.
Yes, we would love it. Please do. If you find anything that you think might be one of these invaders, or you're not sure and you're just wondering, please don't hesitate to send those to us so we can help get them identified. It's better to have a negative report than not report something that is invasive.
Right.
Okay. In the chat, there's actually Robert has put in the information for Washington. So if anyone wants to check the chat.
Thanks
again, Linda. And also, if any of you are actually in town, when we're able to open again, reopen to share our research, Linda's project is really located at the OSU Lewis and Brown Farm. And if you guys are interested one day as part of the training, maybe we can actually go out there and take a look at that project. It's pretty cool. And also, we're really concerned about this worm because it is being sold as fish bait because of its rapid, violent thrashing movements in water. I've actually put one in a beaker. I think Linda actually has a video of that, but it was wriggling for about 20 minutes after we left it in the water. So there, you can see why people want it as fishing bait, but because of its ability to deplete the litter layer in our Pacific Northwest forest, that's really critical for regeneration as well as erosion control, and also reducing the amount of methylated mercury that gets into our watersheds and ultimately gets accumulated in fish.
Thank you, and thanks so much, Linda, for joining us. It's wonderful to have you share your knowledge about this jumping worm. Okay, so moving on with more species to learn today, we're going to jump into aquatic weeds. What I'm going to talk to you about is a series of weeds that live basically in the open water. They look a little different, but they all have very similar impacts in that they essentially crowd the water so that you can't really use it anymore. It becomes very much choked with vegetation and a lack of diversity and structure underneath the water, so that it does not provide very good habitat for fish or other invertebrates that live there. Also, the dense vegetation, while it does produce oxygen in the day, it does consume oxygen at night and creates anoxic conditions and increased acidity. And so you often have fish kills associated with aquatic plant infestations, along with just not being able to swim or boat or utilize the water resource. So the first quiz question, this is a little bit tougher. Let's see who knows this one. I have 4 to 6 leaves per whorl arranged around the stem with finely toothed leaves that can be seen under magnification. And my leaf midrib is smooth. I think you all have to be like expert invasive species experts to get this one. At least I think I would have to. I'll let you. Anybody know that one? Can put it in. Rich hydrilla is very close. That's good. But John got it with Brazilian Elodea. So you will definitely come across this in Oregon and possibly in some of the waters that you'll be surveying. Brazilian Elodea. And I actually went and got some this morning from the confluence of the Middle Fork, the Coast Fork and the Middle Fork of the Willamette, or actually the North Fork. So I have it here in this jar so you can see what it looks like, these strands of vegetation with whorls of leaves that go around. I can show you in them.
We can't see your jar, Tanya.
You can't see the jar?
No, we're only looking at your presentation. I don't see your...
You don't see the video? You don't see my webcam?
No, I don't. I don't know about anything else.
If you click on Tanya's image down, you can naturally pull her up and see what she's trying to present.
If you are able to, oops, I got a different webcam now. It's down here. Yeah, if you're able to, I did bring some specimens that I was to show you through the webcam, which I seem to have switched to my other webcam and inadvertently. Oh, there, it's back. So if you're able to see it, the pictures are also good. But so I brought the Brazilian Elodea, so you could see the 4 to 6 whorled.
Tanya, hold it real steady because there's a lag time. There you go, much better. Yeah, that's perfect right there because it's against the or your ceiling.
Now, if you notice the ones on the bottom, actually they have 3 petals, 3 leaves that go around. So that makes me think this is actually not the Brazilian Elodea, but our native Elodea canadensis, which is easily confused with Brazilian Elodea, but it has 3 leaves instead of 4 to 6. And we'll go over that more in a little bit. The next plant is, I'm very similar to Brazilian Elodea, but can be distinguished by my small white to yellowish potato-like tubers attached to the roots. Anybody know what that one might be? I think some of you had it at the very big when you were guessing before. And this one is hydrilla. So those of you who guessed hydrilla before, you were very close because hydrilla does look a lot like Brazilian Elodea. But we don't really have it in Oregon yet, fortunately. It prefers warmer waters, but it has been detected in Washington. It is distinguished from Brazilian Elodea by these potato-like tubers, and also the edges of the leaves are down the midrib is you can really see distinct like tooth-like serrations. So here here's a comparison of hydrilla with Brazilian Elodea. And here's a comparison of the native Elodea canadensis with hydrilla. So they all look very similar, and even the native Elodea canadensis can be invasive in some settings because it takes advantage of slower moving water and higher nutrients and warmer water conditions. And Darlene asks, how is it different to the plants you can get for your fish tank? And actually, many pet shops do actually sell Brazilian Elodea to you. They're not supposed to, but you will find it in the pet stores for fish tank vegetation. So you need to kind of keep an eye out for that you're not getting Brazilian Elodea. It's also sold for use in classrooms because the cell walls are just perfect to see under a microscope for teaching about cell biology. A bright green colored aquatic plant that has an emergent portion that looks like a cluster of small feathery Christmas trees coming out of the water. I cause flooding and drainage problems and can restrict recreational activities. Anybody know what that one is? The Christmas tree-like clusters. That's right, rich parrot feather. So I have some of that also. If you care to look at my webcam, I can show it's in my jar here, and the parrot feathers sticking out. It's really quite pretty and quite dainty, but it does form very thick mats of vegetation. It's a photo of it. Underwater, it looks quite different. It looks like the Eurasian water milfoil, which is next, right? Laura's got it. Sam says Brazilian Elodea is now illegal to sell in Washington, Oregon, but some pet shops do still sell them. Yeah, and I have seen that. Our next submerged aquatic is got 3 to 5 feathery leaves arranged in whorls around the stem. When you pull me out of the water, my leaves lie flat along the stem. Any guesses for that one? Laura got it right. She guessed a little early, but a Eurasian water milfoil. And so this one's very common. It was easy for me to go get some. Those of you who want to look at the webcam, I have it in this cup, and you can see that it looks pretty fluffy in there, but as soon as I bring it out, they just droop along the stem, and all the leaves just kind of hang down and flat along the stem. So that's a distinguishing feature. There is a native water milfoil, but when you pull it out, the leaves stay rather rigid, and they don't fly flat like that. All right, moving on. We got a few more species to cover. I think that we'll get to it before 2. We'll try not to rush too much, but we'll try to keep a good clip to get through our species to be aware of. I'm a dandelion-like perennial with bright orange flowers and hairy stems. I have a stolon that runs horizontal, and I have milky sap. What am I? This one might be pretty harder. Oh yeah, Zach. Close. Hawkeye. Yes. Orange hawkweed. Oh man, that's correct. You guys are good. You know your invasives. Orange hawkweed or devil's paintbrush. Hieracium aurantiosum. There's a lot of invasive hawkweeds out there, but this is the only one that's orange. And one of the concerns about it is that it is really easily would be able to invade like high mountain meadows in wilderness areas because of its ability to basically spread by the wind so quickly. So it looks like a dandelion, but it's bright orange. And it does spread with stolons horizontally along the ground and create these thick mats of vegetation. And then if you look at the plant itself, it's distinguished by having no leaves on the stem of the flower. So you could see here that there's no leaves growing along the stem. And our native hawkweeds do have leaves on the stem. All right. The ridge down the center of my leaf blade distinguished me from cattails. I form dense root mats that trap sediment. I produce yellow flowers and disc-like seeds that float. Oh, great to hear the early detection story that Dave Klug shared, that the botanist eradicated a new population of orange hawkweed along Highway 22. It's been gone for years. That's fantastic. We love to hear success stories. And yeah, yellow flag iris. You guys got that one? And I actually brought some. I actually have some growing in my pond, which I keep well controlled, and I find it convenient for these workshops. So I'm going to go get it so I can show you on the video if that helps. Well, I'm not sure it does, but I got it, so I'm going to try. I'll be right back. All right, so I have here with me some leaves of yellow flag iris. You can see it's pretty big. And if you look close up at the leaf here, it's a very flat, like irises generally are. And then this, if you run your finger along the midridge here, it's got this thick midridge that you can definitely feel it there. It's done flowering for the year, but I did have one more seed pod left. I'm going to remove them all, but here's a seed pod. And inside the pod, you'll find these brown, they look like ibuprofen tablets that float. So that's how it spreads so quickly, is through these brown seeds that float. And I also brought with me cattail that I picked up this morning from Mount Pisgah, and because it's commonly confused with cattail, and just to show you how the cattail is really round along the bottom and not flat. When yellow flag iris is not blooming, it can be confused with cattail, but it's got a round base rather than flat, and it doesn't have that distinctive midridge. Here's an example of a pond being overtaken by yellow flag iris. It forms these mats of vegetation that eventually just cover ponds. Okay. I have triangle-shaped stems and grow along lake shores and slow-moving rivers where I crowd native plants and destroy fish habitat. Triangle-shaped stems. Anybody know this one? This might be even tougher than some of the other aquatics, since it's an early detection species. It is flowering rush. This, as you can see from the map, is not that abundant in Oregon yet, but it is in the Columbia River Basin and able to be spread downstream. Like other emergent plants, and like yellow flag iris, it just forms these monocultures, mats of vegetation that exclude native species and fish. You can just see it. You can recognize it when it flowers by these pink flowers that are like an umbel shape, basically, like kind of the same shape as like a cow parsnip or a Queen Anne's lace flower. Also, this triangle-shaped stem. So if you see something that's growing along the river that looks like a rush or a reed, try rolling it in your fingers to see if it's a triangle shape. I'm upright bushy plant, have square stalks and long spikes of bright magenta flowers. I invade wetlands where I form dense, impenetrable stands which are unsuitable as cover food or nesting sites for a wide range of native wetland animals. Anybody know that one? That's right. You guys know purple loosestrife. You are on it, Laura and Eric. So purple loosestrife, right along with yellow flag iris and flowering rush, it's emergent wetland invader, and similar kinds of impacts. And you can recognize it by its square stem. Roll it in your finger, and if it doesn't roll around smoothly, it might be purple loosestrife. My leaves are large and nearly heart-shaped. I can grow up to 10 feet tall and have stems like bamboo. I invade riparian habitat, and my rhizomes and stems spread downstream with floods. Who knows this one? That's right. You guys got it. Japanese knotweed. So knotweed becoming quite abundant in Oregon. I actually studied knotweed when I was in graduate school in upstate New York, and it was everywhere there. When I came home to Oregon like 15 years ago, it was still kind of a new invader, and now I've been sad to see it spread so widely. This is a 1 mile patch, 1 square mile patch of, no, 1 acre, sorry, an acre patch of knotweed on the Nehalem River. It grows in the riparian areas where it can basically impede the growth of native baby trees. So all of these alders here, which have a short lifespan, when they fall over and die, there won't be any baby alders to replace it. And the leaves of Japanese knotweed actually have very poor nutrients. What they do is they suck all the nutrients back into the stem every winter when they senesce and die. And so when the leaves fall off, there's almost no nitrogen in them. Whereas the alders are known for having very nutritious leaves as nitrogen fixers. So, so you're basically replacing the really important riparian species, these alders, which also provide fish habitat when the trees fall into the river. So you're replacing these alders with Japanese knotweed, which provides very little cover, very little value to the river habitat or riparian habitat. So, very tall plant, bamboo likes leaves, and I actually did bring one. I grabbed a Japanese knotweed, so I'm going to go show it to you. Hold on. Be careful not to knock down all my lamps when I went to get it. But so here's the bottom part of the stem. And here comes the rest of the plant. So you can see extremely tall over my head. And we have the heart-shaped alternate leaves along the stem. And you can also notice that it has like little red spots on the stem, and it looks like bamboo, but it's not as strong as bamboo. It's easily broken and crushed. And I'm going to try to get rid of this without knocking over all my equipment. All right. More photos. We're getting there. We're getting there. I know we're a little over, but we're close to the end. There's 3 different varieties of knotweed, the slightly different shaped leaves, and the giant and the Japanese knotweed hybridized to form bohemian knotweed, which was actually more common. It looks similar to those leaves, though. I resemble cow parsnip on steroids. I grow very tall, up to 20 feet, and have huge, hollow, hairy, and purplish spotted stems with a large, umbel-shaped white flower. My jagged, edged, deeply incised leaves distinguish me from cow parsnip. Do not collect a sample of me. My sap causes nasty skin blisters. What am I? You got it. Yep. We already talked about giant hogweed. And I did grab a cow parsnip leaf this morning so you could see it's sort of getting a little bit wilty. But the giant hogweed is similar to cow parsnip. You'll see a lot of cow parsnip. But you can see how these are kind of deeply lobed leaves here. And the edges are a little bit serrated, but not too serrated. I guess it's sort of more smooth of a leaf surface than the giant hogweed, which is much more serrated and crinkly shaped and just much bigger. And also it blooms later in the year. So if you see what looks like a cow parsnip blooming like in July, it might probably be giant hogweed because cow parsnip's actually done. The cow parsnip's actually done blooming now. And cow parsnip also does cause skin irritation as well, so you have to be careful with that as well. Yes, and it does look like poison hemlock. I'm a tall woody vine in the clematis family.
Yeah, cow parsnip can irritate skin, but it's not the same type of mechanism, though. I mean, the giant hogweed actually causes sensitivity to UV radiation, which creates those blister burns. Cow parsnip does not do that.
Okay. Oh, I thought it was a similar, just not as concentrated.
They're different, yes.
Different. Okay. This next one, I'm a tall woody vine that in the clematis family that can smother trees. I'm named after my prolific seed clusters that form puffy spheres that hang from white feathery styles which persist through late fall and winter. Kudzu is a good guess because kudzu does grow big vines and overtakes plants. We're not covering that today, but it would be a good one to cover kudzu in the future. But yeah, old man's beard. It's got leaves that are separated into 5 lobes. So that's actually one leaf with 5 lobes. And it creates a vine. This entire forest here is basically covered with old man's beard. And in the winter is when it's easiest to identify because you will see what looks like a cluster of like white puffy seeds high up in a tree in the winter. It really stands out. But that's something definitely to keep an eye out for. My kidney-shaped leaves with scalloped margins are at the base have no hairs and can emit a garlic smell when crushed. I'm a biennial plant with white flower petals, white 4-petal white flowers. Allelopathic chemicals from my roots inhibit tree growth. You guys got it. Zach is a pro. Garlic mustard, Ken, you got it. So garlic mustard is also a plant to be worried about. It grows in shady understories and is really good at invading pristine, undisturbed habitat. Unlike lots of plants that kind of invade disturbed habitat, garlic mustard will invade undisturbed habitat. You can look for these kidney-shaped leaves with wavy margins. It's a biennial, so the first year it just produces a little rosette, just the leaves, and the second year it'll bolt and produce these saliques, these seed pods. The seeds will last in the soil for 10 years. So even if you go through an area and pull all the garlic mustard, next year you'll have just as much coming back. You crush it, it does smell a little like garlic, but not always. I would definitely go with this leaf shape and that it is smooth, the hairless leaves. Oftentimes they're confused with piggyback plant, but those plants are very hairy. So check out whether or not it has hairs, and I feel like this also kind of looks like elephant skin. That's what I compare it to. I produce berries prized for pies, but in nature my thorny canes and brambly bushes are a threat to riparian areas. Any guesses on that one? Blackberry. Oh, yep, Himalayan blackberry. So I brought some specimens here. Basically, I'm just showing you that the invasive plant, which I'm bringing up here, usually has 5 leaves and vigorous stems with berry clusters right now, currently. Later, they'll be covered in berries. But I also have the native trailing blackberry with me, and you can see it's a little bit more delicate of a plant with 3 leaves generally. And the stem, it's a little bit worn off now, but it has sort of a blue hue that covers the stem. The saying is if you're tripping over it, it's probably the native because you can't really trip over the Himalayan blackberry. It's just too huge. You got to walk around it. But the native trailing blackberry is just covers the trails along the ground. So here's a quiz question for you. Which is the invasive? And the answer there's actually 2. The evergreen blackberry in the lower right-hand corner is also an invasive species. I think there's only 1 or 2 left. You might not see me during the day. I wallow in wetlands and make oval-shaped mud holes. I grub out roots. If you see me, I might have a razor-like ridge on my back and sharp tusks. Any guesses to what this is? That's right, feral pigs. And you might not see feral pigs, but you might see evidence of them by looking for their digs. And what's interesting, and they, destroy riparian areas. And what's interesting is that there's currently a concern about a disease called African swine fever, which is spreading rapidly in Asia and has caused people in China, farmers in China, to kill off, I forgot exactly how many, Sam, but something like 5 million, in the millions of pigs to prevent the spread. And here in the United States, it's a really high alert, and the government has recently issued guidelines related to managing feral swine to prevent the spread of African swine fever. So there's concern that the feral swine will also contribute to the spread of this disease, which could also decimate our hog and swine farming industry.
Yeah, China's actually had to cull about over 300 million pigs.
300 million.
Yeah, almost the population of people in the U.S.
All right, and that's it. That was the last one. So I'm sorry that I went over by 10 minutes, but I hope that you learned a lot about invasive species today. And again, if you have any questions, any follow-up questions, or if you find something and you're curious what it is, just email me or Sam, and we'll be really happy to help identify it. And we'd love to learn how you're applying this knowledge this year in the field, and whether you find anything and you're able to report them thanks to your new knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that this virtual format helped. It's not the same as in person. In person, we can actually do more species as you go around the table, but we all have to do the best we can, and thank you for doing this. Tania, did you go over the Asian giant hornet at the beginning?
Yeah, I covered that at the very beginning.
Good. All right.
Keep an eye out for that giant hornet.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely hear about that if my crew runs into it, I'm sure. Thank you very much, Tania, and also Sam, thanks for joining in too. That was great.
Thanks for having us, and hopefully we'll be in person next year.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We can only hope, yes, that we have everything settled down. So
thanks for being around getting those organisms. No, that's not easy these days. But no, we appreciate you guys joining us, and that helps a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you too, and enjoy the rest of your training, and